Hello everyone, today I'll be reading Chapter 5, Part 2 of 12 Rules for Life. Discipline and punish. Modern parents are terrified of two frequently juxtaposed words, discipline and punish. They evoke images of prisons, soldiers, and jackboots. The distance between disciplinarian and tyrant or punishment and torture is indeed easily traversed. Discipline and punish must be handled with care. The fear is unsurprising, but both are necessary. They can be applied unconsciously or consciously, badly or well, but there is no escaping their use. It's not that it's impossible to discipline with reward. In fact, rewarding good behavior can be very effective. The most famous of all behavior psychologists, B.F. Skinner, was a great advocate of this approach. He was expert at it. He taught pigeons to play ping pong, although they only rolled the ball back and forth by pecking it with their beaks. But they were pigeons, so even though they played badly, it was still pretty good. Skinner even taught his birds to pilot missiles during the Second World War. In Project Pigeon, later Alcorn, he got a long way before the invention of electronic guidance systems rendered his efforts obsolete. Skinner observed the animals he was training to perform such acts with exceptional care. Any actions that approximated what he was aiming at were immediately followed by a reward of just the right size, not small enough to be inconsequential, but not too so large that it devalued future rewards. Such an approach can be used with children and works very well. Imagine that you would like your toddler to help set the table. It's a useful skill. You like him better if he could do it, if it would be good for his self-esteem. So you break the target behavior down into its component parts. One moment of setting the table is carrying a plate from the cupboard to the table. Even that might be too complex. Perhaps your child has only been walking a few months. He's still wobbly and unreliable. So you start his training by handing him a plate and having him hand it back. A pat on the head could follow. He might turn it into a game. Pass with your left, switch to your right, suckle around your back, and then you might give him a plate and take a few steps backward so that he has to traverse a few steps before giving it back. Train him to become a plate handling virtuoso. Don't leave him trapped in his klutzdom. You can teach virtually anyone anything with such an approach. First, figure out what you want, then watch the people around you like a hawk. Finally, whenever you see anything a bit more like what you want, swoop in, hawk, remember, and deliver a reward. Your daughter has been very reserved since she became a teenager. You wish she would talk more. That's the target. More communicative daughter. One morning over breakfast, she shares an anecdote about school. That's an excellent time to pay attention. That's the reward. Stop texting and listen, unless you don't want her to tell you anything ever again. Parental interventions that make children happy clearly can and should be used to shape behavior. The same goes for husbands, wives, co-workers, and parents. Skinner, however, was a realist. He noted that use of reward was very difficult. The observer had to attend patiently until the target spontaneously manifested the desired behavior and then reinforced. This required a lot of time and a lot of waiting, and that's a problem. He also had to starve his animals down to 3/4 of their normal body weight before they would become so interested enough in food or reward to truly pay attention. But these are not the only shortcomings of the purely positive approach. Negative emotions, like positive counterparts, help us learn. We need to learn because we're stupid and easily damaged. We can die. That's not good, and we don't feel good about it. If we did, we would seek death, and then we would die. We don't even feel good about dying if it only might happen. And that's all the time. In that manner, negative emotions, for all their unpleasantness, protect us. We feel hurt and scared and ashamed and disgusted so we can avoid damage, and we're susceptible to feeling such things a lot. In fact, we feel more negative about loss of a given size than we feel good about the same size again. Pain is more potent than pleasure, and anxiety more than hope. Emotions, positive and negative, come in two usefully differentiated variants. Satisfaction, technically, satiation, tells us that what we did was good, while hope, technically incentive reward, indicates that something pleasurable is on the way. Pain hurts us, so we won't repeat actions that produce personal damage or social isolation, as loneliness is also technically a form of pain. Anxiety makes us stay away from hurtful people and bad places so we don't have to feel pain. All these emotions must be balanced against each other and carefully judged in context, but they are all required to keep us alive and thriving. We therefore do our children a disservice by failing to use whatever is available to help them learn, including negative emotions, even though such use should occur in the most merciful possible manner. Skinner knew that threats and punishments could stop unwanted behaviors, just as a reward reinforces what is desirable. In a world paralyzed at the thought of interfering with the hypothetically pristine path of natural child development, it can be difficult even to discuss the former techniques. However, children would not have such a lengthy period of natural development prior to maturity if their behavior did not have to be shaped. They would just leap out of the womb, ready to trade stocks. Children also cannot be fully sheltered from fear and pain. They are small and vulnerable. They don't know much about the world, even when they are doing something as natural as learning to walk. They are constantly being walloped by the world, and this is to say nothing of the frustration and rejection they inevitably experience when dealing with siblings and peers and cooperative, stubborn adults. Given this, the fundamental moral question is not how to shelter children completely from misadventure and failure, so they never experience any fear or pain, but how to maximize their learning so that useful knowledge may be gained with minimal cost. In the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty, the king and the queen have a daughter, the Princess Aurora. After a long wait, they plan a great christening to introduce her to the world. They welcome everyone who loves and honors their new daughter. But they fail to invite Maleficent, malicious, malevolent, who is essentially queen of the underworld, or nature in her negative guise. This means, symbolically, that the two monarchs are overprotecting their beloved daughter by setting up a wall around her that has nothing negative in it. But this does not protect her, it makes her weak. Maleficent curses the princess, sentencing her to death at the age of 16, caused by the prick of a spinning wheel's needle. The spinning wheel is the wheel of fate. The prick, which produces blood, symbolizes the loss of virginity, a sign of emergence of the woman from the child. Fortunately, a good fairy, the positive element of nature, reduces the punishment to unconsciousness, redeemable with love's first kiss. The panicked king and queen get rid of all the spinning wheels in the land and hand their daughter over to the much too nice good fairies, of whom are 3. They continue with their strategy of removing all dangerous things, but in doing so, they leave their daughter naive, immature, and weak. One day, just before Aurora's 16th birthday, she meets a prince in the forest and falls in love. The same day, by any reasonable standard, that's a bit much. Then she loudly bemoans the fact that she is to be wed to Prince Philip, to whom she was betrothed as a child, and collapses emotionally when she is brought back to her parents' castle for her birthday. It is at that moment that Maleficent's curse manifests itself. A portal opens up in the castle, a spinning wheel appears, and Aurora pricks her finger and falls unconscious. She becomes Sleeping Beauty. In doing so, again, symbolically speaking, she chooses unconsciousness over the terror of adult life. Something existentially similar to this often occurs very frequently with overprotected children who can be brought low and then desire to the bliss of unconsciousness. By their first real contact with failure or was genuine malevolence, which they do not or will not understand, and against which they have no defense. Take the case of the 3-year-old who has not learned to share. She displays her selfish behavior in the presence of her parents, but they are too nice to intervene. More truthfully, they refuse to pay attention, admit to what is happening, and teach her how to act properly. They are annoyed, of course, when she won't share with her sister, but they pretend everything is okay. It's not okay. They will snap at her later for something totally unrelated. She will be hurt by that and confused but learn nothing. Worse, when she tries to make friends, it won't go well because of her lack of social sophistication. Children her own age will be put off by her inability to cooperate. They will fight with her, or wander off and find someone else to play with. The parents of those children will observe her awkwardness and misbehavior and won't invite her back to play with their kids. She will be lonely and rejected. And that will produce anxiety, depression, and resentment. That will produce the turning from life that is equivalent to the wish for the unconsciousness. Parents who refuses to adopt the responsibility for disciplining their children think they can just opt out the conflict necessary for proper child rearing. They avoid being the bad guy in the short term, but they do not at all rescue or protect their children from fear and pain. Quite the contrary, the judgmental and uncertain broader social world will mete out conflict and punishment far greater than that which would have been delivered by an awake parent. You can discipline your children, or you can turn that responsibility over to the harsh and caring judgmental world, and the motivation for the later decision should never be confused with love. You might object, as modern parents sometimes do. Why should a child even be subject to arbitrary dictates of a parent? In fact, there is a new variant of politically correct thinking that presumes that such an idea is adultism, a form of prejudice and oppression analogous to say sexism or racism. The question of adult authority must be answered with care. That requires a thorough examination of question itself. Accepting an objection as formulated is halfway to accepting its validity, and that can be dangerous if the question is ill-posed. Let's break it down. First, why should a child be subject? That's easy. Every child must listen to and obey adults because he or she is dependent on the care that one or more imperfect grown-ups is willing to bestow. Given this, it is better for the child to act in a manner that invites genuine affection and goodwill. Something even better might be imagined. The child could act in a manner that simultaneously ensures optimal adult attention, in a manner that benefits his or her present state of being and future development. That's a very high standard, but it's in the best interest of the child, so there is every reason to aspire to it. Every child should also be taught to comply gracefully with expectations of civil society. This does not mean crushed into mindless ideological conformity. It means instead that parents must reward those attitudes and actions that will bring their child success in the world outside the family, and use threat and punishment when necessary to eliminate behaviors that will lead to misery and failure. There's a tight window of opportunity for this as well, so getting it right quickly matters. If a child has not been taught to behave properly by the age of 4, it will forever be difficult for him to or her to make friends. The research literature is quite clear on this. This matters because peers are the primary source of socialization after the age of 4. Rejected children cease to develop because they are alienated from their peers. They fall further and further behind as the other children continue to progress. Thus, the friendless child too often becomes the lonely, antisocial, or depressed teenager and adult. This is not good. Much more of our sanity than we commonly realize is a consequence of our fortunate immersions in a social community. We must be continually reminded to think and act properly. When we drift, the people that care for and love us nudge us in small ways and large back on track. So we better have some of those people around. It's also not the case, back to the question, that adult dictates are all arbitrary. That's only true in a dysfunctional totalitarian state. But in civilized open societies, The majority abide by a fashionable social contract aimed at mutual betterment, or at least at existence in close proximity without too much violence. Even a system of rules that allows for only that minimum contract is by no means arbitrary, given the alternatives. If a society does not adequately reward productive pro-social behavior, insists upon distributing resources in a markedly arbitrary and unfair manner, and allows for theft and exploitation, it will not remain conflict-free for long. If its hierarchies are based only or even primarily on power instead of the competence necessary to get important and difficult things done, it will be prone to collapse as well. This is even true in simpler form of the hierarchies of chimpanzees, which is an indication of its fundamental biological and non-arbitrary emergent truth. Poorly socialized children have terrible lives. Thus, it is better to socialize them optimally. Some of this can be done with reward, but not all of it. The issue is, therefore, not whether to use punishment and threat. The issue is whether to do it consciously and thoughtfully. How then should children be disciplined? This is a very difficult question, because children and parents differ vastly in their temperaments. Some children are agreeable. They deeply want to please, but pay for that with the temperaments. Some children are agreeable. They deeply want to please, but pay for that with a tendency to be conflict-averse and dependent. Others are tougher-minded and more independent. Those kids want to do what they want all the time. They can be challenging, non-compliant, and stubborn. Some children are desperate for rules and structure, and are content even in rigid environments. Others, with little regard for predictability and routine, are immune to demands for even minimal necessary order. Some are wildly imaginative and creative, and others more concrete and conservative. These are all deep, important differences, heavily influenced by biological factors and difficult to modify socially. It is fortunate indeed that in the face of such variability, we are the beneficiaries of much thoughtful meditation on the proper use of social control. Minimum necessary force. Here's a straightforward initial idea. Rules should not be multiplied beyond necessity. Alternatively stated, bad laws drive out respect for good laws. This is the ethical, even legal equivalent of Occam's razor, the scientist's conceptual guillotine, which states that the simplest possible hypothesis is preferable. So don't encumber children or their disciplinarians with too many rules. That path leads to frustration. Limit the rules, then figure out what to do when one of them gets broken. A general, context-independent rule for punishment severity is hard to establish. However, a helpful norm has already been and tried. In English common law, one of the great products of Western civilization, its analysis can help us establish a second meaningful principle. English common law allows you to defend your rights, but only in a reasonable manner. Someone breaks into your house. You have a loaded pistol. You have a right to defend yourself, but it's better to do it in stages. What if it's a drunk and confused neighbor? Shoot him, you think, but it's not that simple. So you say instead, stop, I have a gun. If that produces neither explanation nor retreat, you might consider a warning shot. Then if the perpetrator still advances, you might take aim at his leg. Don't mistake any of this for legal advice. It's an example. Yeah. A single brilliantly practical principle can be used to generate all these incrementally more severe reactions that of minimal necessary force. So we have two general principles of discipline. The first, limit the rules. The second, use the least force necessary to enforce those rules. About the first principle, you might ask, limit the rules to what exactly? Here are some suggestions. Do not bite, kick, or hit, except in self-defense. Do not torture and bully other children so you don't end up in jail. Eat in a civilized and thankful manner so that people are happy to have you at their house and pleased to feed you. Learn to share so other kids will play with you. Pay attention when spoken to by adults so they don't hate you and might therefore deign to teach you something. Go to sleep properly and peacefully so that your parents can have a private life and not resent your existence. Take care of your belongings because you need to learn about how and because you are lucky to have them. Be good company when something fun is happening, so that you're invited for the fun. Act so that other people are happy you're around, so that people will want you around. A child who knows these rules will be welcome everywhere. About the second, equally important principle, your question might be, what is minimum necessary force? This must be established experimentally, stating with the smallest possible intervention. Some children will be turned to stone by a glare. A verbal command will stop another. A thumb cock flick of the index finger on a small hand might be necessary for some. Such a strategy is particularly useful in public places such as restaurants. It can be administered suddenly, quietly, and effectively, without risking escalation. What's the alternative? A child who is crying angrily, demanding attention, is not making himself popular. A child who is running from table to table and disrupting everyone's peace is bringing disgrace, an old word, but a good one, on himself and his parents. Such outcomes are far from optimal, and children will definitely misbehave more in public because they are experimenting, trying to establish if the same old rules also apply in the new place. They don't sort that out verbally, not when they are under 3. When our children were little and we took them to restaurants, they attracted smiles. They sat nicely and ate politely. They couldn't keep it up for long, but we didn't keep them there too long. When they started to get antsy, after sitting for 45 minutes, we knew it was time to go. That was part of the deal. Nearby diners would tell us how nice it was to see a happy family. We weren't always happy, and our children weren't always properly behaved, but they were most of the time. And it was wonderful to see people responding so positively to their presence. It was truly good for the kids. They could see that people liked them. This also reinforced their good behavior. That was the reward. People were really like your kids if you give them the chance. This is something I learned as soon as we had our first baby, our daughter ~Michaela. When we took her down the street in her little fold-up stroller in French Montreal, working-class neighborhood, rough-looking, heavy-drinking lumberjack types would stop in their tracks and smile at her. They would coo and giggle and make stupid faces. Watching people respond to children restores your faith in human nature, all that's multiplied when your kids behave in public. To ensure that such things happen, you have to discipline your child carefully and effectively. And to do that, you have to know something about reward and punishment, instead of shying away from the knowledge. Part of establishing a relationship with your son or daughter is learning how that small person responds to disciplinary intervention, and then intervening effectively. It's very easy to mouth cliches instead, such as, there is no excuse for physical punishment, or hitting children merely teaches them to hit. Let's start with the former claim, there is no excuse for physical punishment. First, we should note that widespread consensus around that idea that some forms of misbehavior, particularly those associated with theft and assault, are both wrong and should be subject to sanction. Second, we should note that almost all those sanctions involve punishment in its many psychological and more directly physical forms. Deprivation of liberty causes pain in a manner essentially similar to that of physical trauma. The same can be said of the use of social isolation, including timeout. We know this neurobiologically. The same brain areas mediate response to all 3, and all are ameliorated by the same class of drugs, opiates. Jail is clearly physical punishment, particularly solitary confinement, even when nothing violent happens. Third, we should note that some misbegotten actions must be brought to a halt both effectively and immediately, not least so that something worse doesn't happen. What's the proper punishment for someone who will stop poking a fork into an electrical socket, or who runs away laughing in a crowded supermarket parking lot? The answer is simple: whatever will stop it fastest, without reason, because the alternative could be fatal. That's pretty obvious in the case of parking lot or outlet, but the same thing applies in the social realm, and that brings us to the fourth point regarding excuses for physical punishment. The penalties for misbehavior, of the sort that could have been effectively halted in childhood, become increasingly severe as children get older, and it is disproportionately those who remain unsocialized effectively by age 4 who end up punished explicitly by society in their later youth and early adulthood. Those unconstrained 4-year-olds, in turn, are often those who were unduly aggressive by nature, at age known as stealing. They comprise about 5% of boys and much smaller percentage of girls. To unthinkingly parrot the magic line, there is no excuse for physical punishment, is also to foster the delusion that teenage devils magically emerge from one innocent little child angels. You are not doing your child any favors by overlooking any misbehavior, particularly if he or she is temperamentally more aggressive. To hold the no excuse for physical punishment theory is also fit to assume that the word no can be effectively uttered to another person in the absence of the threat of punishment. A woman can say no to a powerful narcissistic man only because she has social norms, the laws, and the state backing her up. A parent can only say no to a child who wants a third piece of cake because he or she is larger, stronger, and more capable than the child, and is additionally backed up in his authority by law and state. What no means in the final analysis is always, if you continue to do that, something you do not like will happen to you. Otherwise, it means nothing, or worse, it means another nonsensical nothing muttered by ignorable adults, or worse still, it means all adults are ineffectual and weak. This is a particularly bad lesson. When every child's destiny is to become an adult, then when most things that are learned without undue personal pain are modeled or explicitly taught by adults, what does a child who ignores adults and holds them in contempt have to look forward to? Why grow up at all? And that's the story of Peter Pan, who thinks all adults are variants of Captain Hook, tyrannical and terrified of his own mortality. Think hungry crocodile with clock in his stomach. The only time no ever means no in the absence of violence is when it is uttered by one civilized person to another. And what about the idea that hitting a child merely teaches them to hit? First, no, wrong. Too simple. For starters, hitting is a very unsophisticated word to describe the disciplinary act of an effective parent. If hitting accurately describes the entire range of physical force, then there would be no difference between rain droplets and atom bombs. Magnitude matters, and so does context. If we are not being willfully blind and naive about the issue, every child knows the difference between being bitten by a mean and provoked dog and being nipped by his own pet when he tries playfully, but too carelessly, to take its bone. How hard someone is hit is and why they are hit cannot merely be ignored when speaking of hitting. Timing, part of context, is also crucial importance. If you flick your 2-year-old with your finger just after he smacks the baby on the head with a wooden block, he will get the connection and be at least somewhat less willing to smack her again in the future. That seems like a good outcome. He certainly won't conclude that he should hit her more, using the flick of his mother's fingers as an example. He's not stupid, he's just jealous, impulsive, and not very sophisticated. And how else are you going to protect his younger sibling? If you discipline ineffectively, then the baby will suffer. Maybe for years the bullying will continue because you won't do a damn thing to stop it. You will avoid the conflict that's necessary to establish peace. You will turn a blind eye, and then later, when the younger child confronts you, maybe even in adulthood, you'll say, "I never knew it was like that. You didn't just want to know. So you didn't. You just rejected the responsibility of discipline and justified it with a continual show of your niceness." Every gingerbread house has a witch inside it that devours children. So where does all that leave us? With the decision to discipline effectively or to discipline ineffectively, but never the decision to forego discipline altogether. Because nature and society will punish in a draconian manner whatever errors of childhood behavior remain uncorrected. So here are a few practical hints. Time out can be an extremely effective form of punishment, particularly if the misbehaving child is welcome as soon as he controls his temper. An angry child should sit by himself until he comes home. Then he should be allowed to return to normal life. That means the child wins instead of his anger. Okay. That rule is, come be with us as soon as you can behave properly. This is a very good deal for child, parent, and society. You will be able to tell if your child has really regained control. You will like him again. Despite his earlier misbehavior, if you're still mad, maybe he hasn't completely repented. Or maybe you should do something about your tendency to hold a grudge. If your child is the kind of determined vermin who simply runs away, laughing when placed on the steps or in his room, physical restraint might have to be added to the time-out routine. A child can be held carefully but firmly by the upper arms until he or she stops squirming and pays attention. If that fails, being turned over a parent's knee might be required. For the child who is pushing the limits in a spectacularly inspired way, a sweat across the backside can indicate requisite seriousness on the part of a responsible adult. There are some situations in which even that will not suffice, partly because some children are very determined, exploratory, and tough, or because the offending behavior is truly severe. And if you're not thinking such things through, then you are not acting responsibly as a parent. You're leaving the dirty work to someone else, who will be much dirtier doing it. A summary of principles. Disciplinary Principle 1. Limit the rules. Principle 2. Use minimum necessary force. Here's the thought: parents should come in pairs. Raising your children is demanding and exhausting. Because of this, it's easy for a parent to make a mistake. Insomnia, hunger, the aftermath of an argument, a hangover, a bad day at work, any of these things singly can make a person unreasonable, while in combination they can produce someone dangerous. Under such circumstances, it is necessary to have someone else around to observe and step in and discuss. This will make it less likely that a whining, provocative child and her fed-up, cranky parent will excite each other to the point of no return. Parents should come in pairs so the father of a newborn can watch the new mother so she won't get worn out and do something desperate after hearing her colicky baby wail from 11 in the evening until 5 in the morning for 30 nights in a row. I'm not saying we should be mean to single mothers, many of whom struggle impossibly and courageously, and a proportion of whom have had to escape singly from a brutal relationship. But that doesn't mean we should pretend that all family forms are equally viable. They are not, period. Here's the fourth principle, one that is more particularly psychological. Parents should understand their own capacity to be harsh, vengeful, arrogant, resentful, angry, and deceitful. Very few people set out, consciously, to do a terrible job as father or mother, but bad parenting happens all the time. This is because people have a great capacity for evil, as well as good, and because they remain willfully blind to that fact. People are aggressive and selfish, as well as kind and thoughtful. For this reason, no adult human being, no hierarchical predatory ape, can truly violate being dominated by an upstart child. Revenge will come. 10 minutes after a pair of all too nice and patient parents have failed to prevent a public tantrum at the local supermarket, they will pay their toddler back with the cold shoulder when he runs up, excited to show mom and dad his newest accomplishment. Enough embarrassment, disobedience, and dominance challenge, and even the most hypothetically selfless parents will become resentful. And then the real punishment will begin. Resentment breeds the desire for vengeance. Fewer spontaneous offers of love will be offered, with more rationalizations for their absence. Fewer opportunities for the personal development of the child will be sought out. A subtle turning away will begin. And this is only the beginning of the road to total familial warfare, conducted mostly in the underworld, and beneath the false facade of normality and love. This frequently traveled path is much better avoided. A parent who is seriously aware of his or her limited tolerance and capacity for misbehavior when provoked can therefore seriously plan a proper disciplinary strategy, particularly if monitored by an equally awake partner, and never let things degenerate to the point where genuine hatred emerges. Beware. There are toxic families everywhere. They make no rules and limit no misbehavior. The parents lash out randomly and predictably. The children live in that chaos and are crushed. If they are timid or rebel counterproductively, they are tough. It's not good. It can get murderous. Here's the fifth and final and most general principle. Parents have a duty to act as proxies for the real world, merciful proxies, creating caring proxies, but proxies nonetheless. This obligation supersedes any responsibility to ensure happiness, foster creativity, or boost self-esteem. It is primary duty of parents to make their children socially desirable that will provide the child with opportunity, self-regard, and security. It's more important even than fostering individual identity. That holy grail can only be pursued. In any case, such a high degree of social sophistication has been established. The good child and the responsible parent. A properly socialized 3-year-old is polite and engaging. She is also no pushover. She evokes interest from other children and appreciation from adults. She exists in a world where other kids welcome her and compete for her attention, and while adults are happy to see her, instead of hiding behind false smiles, she will be introduced to the world by people who are pleased to do so. This will do more for her eventual individuality than any cowardly parental attempt to avoid day-to-day conflict and discipline. Discuss your likes and dislikes with regards to your children with your partner, or failing that, a friend, but do not be afraid to have likes and dislikes. You can judge suitable from unsuitable, and wheat from chaff. You realize the difference between good and evil. Having clarified your stance, having assessed yourself for pettiness, arrogance, and resentment, you take the next step and you make your children behave. You take responsibility for their discipline. You take responsibility the mistakes you will inevitably make while disciplining. You can apologize when you're wrong and learn to do better. You love your kids after all. If their actions make you dislike them, think what an effect they will have on other people. They care much less about them than you. Those other people will punish them severely by omission or commission. Don't allow that to happen. Better to let your little monsters know what is desirable and what is not, so they become sophisticated denizens of the world outside the family. A child who pays attention instead of drifting and can play and does not whine. It is comical but not annoying. It is trustworthy that child will have friends wherever he goes. His teacher will like him, and so will his parents. If he attends politely to adults, he will be attended to, smiled at, and clear rules make for secure children and calm, rational parents. Clear principles of discipline and punishment can balance mercy and justice so that social development and psychological maturity can be optimally promoted. Clear rules and proper discipline help the child and the family and society establish, maintain, and expand order. That is all that protects us from chaos and terrors of the underworld, where everything is uncertain, anxiety-provoking, hopeless, and depressing. There are so greater gifts that a committed and courageous parent can bestow. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And that is all for Chapter 5, Part 2. Tomorrow I'll be reading Chapter 6, Part 1. So make sure to like, subscribe, and follow me so that I can keep on posting books reading like this every day. And then don't worry, I'll be extracting ideas and stories from the books I have read and post them again on my TikTok and my Facebook and YouTube, but mostly on TikTok. Therefore, this is Daniel. See you on the next one.